I remember the first time the recorder started acting up. The voice on the playback was mine. Or at least, it sounded like me, trapped inside the static, muttering numbers and coordinates that made no sense at the time. Confirm visual, negative, anomaly, movement, temperature spike. The words were fractured, each clipped by bursts of white noise. I could hear the faint hiss of wind. Or maybe it was the recorder itself shivering. There was a sense, immediately, that something wasn't right, not just with the equipment but with the place itself. The log continued, jumps in time and clarity making it nearly impossible to follow. A faint echo of a shout, "Team!" lingered for a heartbeat before collapsing into static. Snowdrifts slamming against the outpost walls, the metallic groan of stressed panels, and the high-pitched whine of failing generators created a rhythm that was almost hypnotic. In the background, I thought I heard something else, a scraping, low and deliberate, but gone as quickly as it appeared. The sound left no prints, no evidence, just a whisper through the speakers. I reached for the microphone, my gloved hand stiff from the cold, fumbling. "Outpost 09, this is Rourke. Check-in, status report." My voice cracked, swallowed immediately by a burst of interference. Static surged like a pulse through the room. There was a moment, maybe a second, maybe longer, when the world outside the recorder went silent. And I swear I could hear the ice itself creaking, stretching, as though the continent were breathing beneath us. Then came the temperature spike. The internal monitors of the outpost registered a sudden change, a warmth that shouldn't exist at 78 degrees south. The log captures my confusion. Heating, impossible, check sensors. My words overlap, layered in haste, and I realize I was no longer just speaking into a recorder, but talking to something else. Unseen. Listening. Outside, the wind screamed against reinforced panels, carrying with it shapes that the eye couldn't track. Shadows pressed against the frosted windows in ways that defied logic. I tried to continue documenting, forcing myself to breathe, to narrate as though normalcy could anchor the moment. Footprints. Around the north perimeter. Not ours. Too deep. No prints inside. My voice is low now, hesitant, the recorder picking up the tremor I tried to mask. Something had passed close enough to leave impressions in fresh snow, but never entered the structure. The log captures the sensation of being watched, that prickling awareness that settled over my skin and refused to leave. The final snippet in this segment is barely audible, a distorted pulse, like a heartbeat, followed by a long metallic scrape across the outer hull. Then silence, not the calm after a storm, but a vacuum, a missing presence that left the recorder whistling with static. The timestamp flickers once more, before dying. This audio, recovered months later, is the only trace of what we experienced that night. It's incomplete, fragmented, and terrifyingly real. Something ancient had awakened at Outpost 09, and I have no idea if it's still down there, waiting. I'm Sergeant Daniel Rourke, United States Army Special Operations, Delta Recon Detachment. My role is reconnaissance and tactical field operations in extreme environments. I've spent more hours in sand, jungle, and ice than I care to count, but nothing prepared me for the deployment to Outpost 09. The mission was classified, labeled under Polar Contingency Protocols, which in normal terms meant we were sent to secure a research facility that had gone dark for reasons the Pentagon didn't want leaked. The call came through my operations officer in the middle of a storm in northern Greenland. I was briefed in increments, details intentionally vague. Outpost 09 had been monitoring subsurface anomalies and seismic readings in East Antarctica. All contact went dark 3 weeks prior. Our unit was tasked to assess the site, recover any personnel or equipment, and document environmental irregularities. The way it was explained, our job was simple: arrive, secure, observe, report. Easy in theory. I specialized in extreme reconnaissance and environmental survival. My team and I trained for polar insertion, high-altitude survival, and rapid extraction under hostile conditions. I carried the standard kit for a mission like this: M4A1 with EOTech optic, suppressed sidearm, dual comm setup, GPS-linked survival beacon, thermal sensors, and environmental monitoring tools. My role extended beyond just observation. We were the tip of the spear in a potentially hostile, unknown environment. We weren't just soldiers. We were troubleshooters for the unexplained. Delta Recon often handles missions where the line between natural phenomena and something beyond comprehension is thin. In this deployment, we were briefed that the environment itself could be lethal. The cold, crevasses, hidden ice fissures, but also that anomalous variables might be present. That was the military euphemism for whatever had taken out the previous team. My squad was small but highly capable. Corporal Sykes handled comms and electronic monitoring. He was the guy who could tell you the frequency of an interference spike before it happened. Specialist Vega was our medic and survival expert, adept at both hypothermia management and field trauma. Lieutenant Hall was our mission lead and tactical coordinator, ensuring our small team operated as a cohesive unit in extreme isolation. And then there was me, eyes and ears in the field, responsible for observing, documenting, and surviving if the mission went sideways. Even before we landed, there was an odd tension in the air. The briefings had been impersonal, almost sterile, with digital maps, projected satellite images, and seismic graphs. But the language always hinted at something off limits. Maintain distance. Do not engage unless necessary. Report anomalies immediately. Those were the words that stuck with me. From the outset, I knew this wasn't going to be a routine recon. This was a mission where the rules of engagement weren't just physical. They were, in some sense, environmental and psychological. By the time our transport landed on the ice shelf near Outpost 09, I felt a sense of anticipation mixed with unease. We were professionals, trained for danger, conditioned for isolation, but there was something in the air, a subtle hum, a tension that even the wind seemed to carry. I had no way of knowing then that this sense of foreboding was the only warning we would get before Outpost 09 revealed what lay beneath the ice. Outpost 09 sits on a narrow ice shelf, jutting into the endless white of East Antarctica at 78 degrees south, 27 degrees east. The shelf is a treacherous expanse of blue-tinted ice, crevasses hidden beneath deceptive snowdrifts, and ridges sharp enough to tear through a glacier suit. From the air, it appears flat, almost serene, but up close, the terrain is hostile and unpredictable, a frozen labyrinth of sheer drops and unstable snow bridges. One misstep could mean plummeting 50 feet or more into a frozen canyon. I learned to read the ice like a tactical map, shadows, snow patterns, and wind-carved contours revealing hidden dangers beneath what looked like flat terrain. The weather doesn't just challenge you, it attacks. Wind speeds can spike from calm to 70 knots in seconds, cutting across exposed faces and armor, forcing your visor shut against sheets of stinging ice crystals. The sun barely crests the horizon in this season, leaving long, ghostly shadows that distort perception. Temperature readings hover near -50 degrees Celsius, with wind chill pushing it lower. Your breath freezes in the air almost instantly. Your gloves become brittle, and electronics that aren't specifically rated for these extremes fail without warning. We were constantly checking sensors and backup equipment, knowing that survival depended on flawless operation. Whiteout conditions are the most deceptive hazard. The blizzard can descend in minutes, erasing the horizon and flattening all visual cues. Even GPS and thermal imaging can be thrown off by atmospheric anomalies or ice reflection. Navigation isn't just about coordinates. It's about trusting your instincts, memorizing the shape of the terrain, and always having an anchor point. Outpost 09 offered some semblance of orientation with its cluster of modular units, reinforced airlocks, and external walkways. But beyond its walls, the landscape is alien, hostile, and unwelcoming. Sound behaves differently here. The cold air carries echoes that shouldn't exist. A crunch of snow from 50 meters away can sound like it's right behind you. High-pitched whistles from ice fissures resemble human voices in the wind. This auditory distortion added to the unease. Every step or comm check had the potential to sound like movement from another source. And in a place as isolated as this, you start questioning what's real. Even the wind itself seems alive, pushing at your body, rattling structures, forcing you to constantly stabilize equipment and footing. The outpost structure is utilitarian, designed for survival and research, not comfort. Modular panels, reinforced windows, and external catwalks link small labs, sleeping quarters, and storage units. Steam vents and emergency heaters hum quietly beneath layers of frost, their warmth a thin comfort against the ever-present cold. Inside, frost gathers on walls and ceilings, forming spikes and patterns reminiscent of icicles, but distorted, unnatural, like frozen fingers reaching downward. It's eerie how familiar human architecture can feel alien when frozen into an endless white wasteland. Even the ice itself seems to hum with a life of its own. Snow can collapse beneath your boots with a sound that's hollow and unnatural. Glacial crevices open silently, then close just as quickly. The subtle, constant cracking of the ice beneath the outpost reverberates through walls and floors, reminding you that nothing is stable, nothing permanent. And beneath all this, there's a sense that the continent itself is watching, patient, unmoved, waiting for its secrets to be uncovered. Our mission to Outpost 09 was straightforward in military terms, but the simplicity was deceptive. Recon and retrieval were our primary objectives. The outpost had gone dark 3 weeks prior, and preliminary satellite scans indicated unusual energy readings emanating from beneath the ice shelf. Our orders were clear: assess the situation, secure the facility, recover any personnel or sensitive equipment, and document all anomalies. There was an unspoken emphasis on containment. The phrase "unknown variables" came up more than once in briefings, a polite military euphemism for whatever had caused the previous team to disappear. The first objective was reconnaissance. Satellite imaging and seismic data suggested subterranean formations beneath the outpost, possibly natural caverns or geological structures of interest. Our job was to verify these findings on the ground, map the area, and determine whether the anomaly posed a threat. Standard reconnaissance procedures applied: visual sweeps, thermal imaging, ground-penetrating radar, and careful logging of environmental deviations. Any unusual readings were to be documented and reported immediately, without interference or engagement unless explicitly authorized. The second objective was retrieval. Any research data, experimental equipment, or personnel records left behind were considered critical. Outpost 09 had been conducting experiments that were highly classified, some involving deep ice drilling and subsurface scanning. The Pentagon's concern wasn't just the loss of data. It was what the data might reveal if left unattended. Our task wasn't to interpret the findings, just to secure them. All collected material would be transported via mobile polar units back to the primary base for analysis. Containment was implicit in every briefing. Any evidence of an anomaly or environmental disturbance, be it thermal, seismic, or electromagnetic, was to be isolated and monitored. No unauthorized interaction, no improvisation. This level of control wasn't paranoia, it was protocol. In extreme environments like Antarctica, even minor miscalculations can become fatal. And when you add unknown factors into the equation, standard military caution isn't just recommended, it's mandatory. We were told that previous teams had observed unusual phenomena before vanishing: equipment failures, erratic temperature fluctuations, and intermittent communication blackouts. While officially these were attributed to extreme cold and solar interference, the repeated pattern was enough to warrant concern. Recon and retrieval weren't just operational, they were precautionary. Our superiors wanted eyes on the site to determine if the anomalies posed a threat to other research outposts, or, more broadly, to any future scientific exploration in the area. From the outset, the mission carried a sense of urgency. We weren't just heading to an abandoned station. We were entering an environment that had already claimed lives under mysterious circumstances. Every element of the operation, from insertion via transport, to tactical movement across the ice shelf, to internal navigation of the outpost, was mapped with precision, contingency for every foreseeable hazard. And yet, beneath all the maps, diagrams, and technical protocols, there was the acknowledgement that the unknown always had the advantage in this frozen wasteland. Even standing outside the reinforced modules, surveying the endless ice and wind, I understood the duality of our purpose: observation and recovery. Reconnaissance demanded patience, focus, and detachment. Retrieval demanded speed and efficiency. But both demanded caution, because Outpost 09 wasn't just abandoned, it was waiting, silent, and perhaps aware of our approach. Whatever lay beneath the ice, Whatever had caused the previous team to vanish was no longer a theoretical concern. It was imminent. Our squad was small but specialized. 4 men trained to operate in extreme conditions with precision and cohesion. Lieutenant Hall was the mission lead, responsible for tactical oversight and coordination. He carried the standard kit, M4A1 with suppressor, multiband comms headset, and tablet interface for mapping and live feed analysis. Hall's calm, calculated demeanor set the tone. In a place like Outpost 09, that was invaluable. Corporal Sykes handled communications and electronic monitoring. He could troubleshoot a failing satellite link in the middle of a blizzard or stabilize a malfunctioning thermal imager in sub-zero temperatures. His pack was loaded with signal boosters, spectrum analyzers, and handheld radios. If the equipment picked up interference or anomalies, Sykes was the one translating static into data we could use. Without him, we might have walked blind into whatever had claimed the previous team. Specialist Vega was our medic and survival expert, dual certified in polar medicine and field trauma. Her kit included a portable hypothermia chamber, injectable stabilizers, emergency field rations, and a compact surgical pack. Vega's role extended beyond traditional medical duties. She constantly monitored team vitals, checked oxygen levels, and ensured that extreme cold didn't compromise cognitive function. In an environment like Antarctica, she was as essential to survival as any weapon. And then there was me, Sergeant Daniel Rourke. Reconnaissance, environmental observation, and tactical adaptability fell to me. My pack contained navigation gear, high-resolution optics, portable thermal sensors, and a field recorder. I moved ahead of the squad when conditions allowed, scanning ice formations, noting anomalies, and relaying environmental data back to Hall. My role wasn't just passive. I was the team's eyes and ears, often putting myself in precarious positions to ensure our collective safety. The squad operated with disciplined efficiency. Roles overlapped just enough to maintain redundancy, but each of us had a defined operational lane. Hall directed movements and priorities. Sykes managed comms and anomalies. Vega monitored human integrity. I scanned and reported environmental hazards. Together, we were a small, tight unit capable of executing a complex mission in isolation, where every misstep could become fatal. Even in briefing and insertion, the cohesion was evident. We reviewed satellite scans, navigated terrain overlays, and cross-checked survival protocols. Communication was succinct, precise, and repeated through multiple channels. The ice shelf, the outpost, the sub-zero environment, every element was accounted for in our planning. Yet, beneath the operational efficiency, a subtle unease lingered. None of us could shake the knowledge that the previous team had vanished without explanation, leaving behind only the cold silence of Outpost 09. As we prepared to descend onto the ice shelf, each of us took a final equipment check, a last glance at the white horizon stretching into infinity. The wind howled, echoing over ridges and hidden crevasses, as if testing our resolve. We were ready, trained, and fully equipped. But in the Antarctic, preparation was only half the battle. The other half was surviving the unknown. We had only been on the ice shelf for a few hours when the first anomaly appeared. It was subtle, almost dismissible, a set of footprints in the snow, too large to be ours, too deep to be a trick of shifting drifts. I paused, crouched, and scanned the area with binoculars. The impressions were spaced irregularly, as though whoever or whatever had made them wasn't bound by human stride. The snow around the prints was compacted unnaturally, and despite the fierce wind, the edges hadn't blown over. Sykes muttered something about sensor readings, and I realized our thermal gear wasn't picking up any residual heat. Inside the perimeter of the outpost, small things began disappearing or misaligning. A tool left near the generator was gone when we returned, only to reappear hours later, shifted by a few inches. We chalked it up to frost-induced contraction or human error, but the repeated pattern felt deliberate. Even Vega noticed an odd drop in temperature localized to certain rooms, a sharp chill that hit like a physical force. Instruments confirmed it, a momentary spike downward in internal thermal readings, yet the cause was untraceable. Then came the strange echoes. Walking along the metal catwalks connecting modules, my footsteps didn't match the sound on the recorder playback. They were out of sync, delayed by a fraction of a second. When I called Hall's name, the response didn't come in his usual voice. It was distorted, like it had traveled through extra distance or through another medium entirely. It was subtle, enough to be ignored, yet it left a prickling awareness on my skin. Something wasn't right, and the ice shelf seemed to hum beneath us, almost in response. Outside, the wind carried unfamiliar noises. Not the expected shriek of gusts over ice ridges, but soft, deliberate scraping, faint and irregular, almost like claws against metal or ice. We froze, scanning the horizon through goggles and thermal scopes. Nothing. The horizon remained empty, the ice and snow untouched except for our tracks and the anomalous footprints. Yet the sensation persisted. Something was moving parallel to us, just out of sight, avoiding detection. Even the animals responded oddly. A lone skua circled overhead in a pattern too precise to be random, letting out shrill cries that didn't match the wind. A sled dog at a nearby outpost bayed once, then refused to move forward, tail tucked, ears pinned. The behavioral oddities were minor, but in the cold monotony of Antarctica, small things take on disproportionate significance. Sykes was the first to comment. "We're not alone here. Whatever it is, it's observing." By the end of that first day, we weren't panicking, but the unease had rooted itself. Every sound, every shadow, every odd temperature fluctuation felt deliberate. We were trained to handle extreme environments, but the ice shelf had its own rules that were shifting beneath our boots. Something ancient was stirring, small yet undeniable, and I had the sinking feeling that it was testing us, feeling out our presence before revealing itself in ways we could not yet comprehend. The ice shelf didn't sleep, and neither did the feeling that we were being watched. Each step on the crusted snow produced a hollow crunch that echoed unnaturally, bouncing off ridges and hidden fissures. The wind carried ghostly whistles, alternating between high-pitched shrieks and low groans, as if the continent itself were groaning beneath the outpost. Even inside the modules, where heaters hummed and vents pushed warm air, there was an unsettling vibration that seemed to reverberate through floors and walls, barely perceptible but constant. Communications began to degrade. Sykes' frequency analyzer displayed spikes and dead zones with no discernible pattern. Voices transmitted across comms, stuttered or became distorted, cutting in and out with increasing frequency. At first, it was frustrating. Later, it became terrifying. We started to double-check coordinates, each of us watching our readings like hawks, knowing that in this place, a misstep could be fatal. Static on the radios wasn't just interference. It felt intentional, like something was probing us through the very channels we depended on. Temperature fluctuations continued. A room that had been stable at -22 degrees Celsius suddenly dipped to -35 degrees Celsius, frosting monitors and forcing us to activate backup heaters. Even Vega couldn't explain the readings. Environmental sensors were reporting changes too rapid and localized to be natural. We noticed our own breath forming frost patterns unusually fast, and every exposed patch of skin turned numb in seconds. We moved with a cautious rhythm, checking walls, floors, and ceiling for drafts or mechanical anomalies, but the source remained elusive. Equipment started failing in subtle ways. Thermal scopes intermittently displayed strange shapes, blurred outlines that vanished when focused. One of Hall's tablet feeds froze on an image of a catwalk, showing a faint shadow crossing behind us that none of our eyes could see. The recorder I carried earlier began picking up low-frequency vibrations, almost like a heartbeat, but distant, delayed. None of it made sense, and yet the cumulative effect was undeniable. Each small failure compounded, feeding an invisible pressure that weighed on morale. Even our movements became cautious and hesitant. Crevasses we had marked earlier seemed to shift subtly. Snowdrifts altered direction between sweeps. Every sound amplified. A dropped tool reverberated as a booming clang. Distant ice cracks sounded like gunshots, and a distant hiss suggested something sliding under the ice shelf. The psychological strain became apparent in subtle ways. Team members flinched at shadows. Voices trembled slightly over comms, and our normally disciplined squad hesitated in unison before each doorway or catwalk. At night, when the whiteout made visual navigation impossible, the tension became almost unbearable. Even with thermal imaging and night vision, The ice seemed to move. Shapes appeared where none should exist, and echoes answered before we called. Every metallic groan of the outpost sounded like structural collapse. Every gust of wind resembled a whisper. We slept in short rotations, never fully resting. Each conscious moment weighted by the certainty that something ancient and untraceable was near. By the end of the first 48 hours, the tension was a tangible presence, more immediate than the cold itself. We were alert, disciplined, but a shadow of paranoia crept into our behavior. Small anomalies were no longer ignored. They demanded attention. Every sensor reading, every sound, every subtle shadow became a potential threat. The ice shelf was no longer just a hostile environment. It was alive in ways we could not yet comprehend, and we were intruders. It started with a sharp metallic clang echoing through the outpost. Hall's footsteps froze as Sykes scanned the catwalk outside. One of the external storage crates had been torn open, its contents scattered across the icy surface. The crates were reinforced, designed to withstand gale-force winds and the impact of shifting ice. Yet here they were, ripped, bent, and empty of critical sensors. Nothing else on the shelf had moved. There was no sign of footprints leading to or from the crate. It was as if something had passed through, strong enough to manipulate metal but invisible to thermal and optical sensors. Inside, the ice beneath the northern wing of the outpost revealed something even more unnerving. Frosted panels had been broken from the inside, shattering in jagged shards that glinted like teeth in the weak light. Around the fracture points, odd etchings marred the walls, symbols we couldn't identify, neither written nor natural. They resembled primitive glyphs, but were scratched with a precision that suggested intelligence. Sykes snapped pictures, but even through the lens, the symbols seemed to shift in subtle ways when viewed from different angles, as though the ice itself was alive. A sudden shift in temperature accompanied the discovery. The broken panels exhaled a blast of air far warmer than anything external heaters could produce, carrying a faint metallic smell that made our stomachs tighten. Vega immediately checked her readings. There were localized electromagnetic spikes, erratic and intense, concentrated around the fractured area. The anomaly wasn't just physical, it was energetic, as though the structure itself was responding to our presence. Outside, the ice formation near the northern ridge had collapsed into a strange, unnatural shape. What appeared at first to be a small crevasse had expanded into a hollowed tunnel, polished and smooth, with walls glinting as if carved deliberately. The dimensions were irregular, angles impossible to reconcile with natural glacial movement. When we approached, the surface emitted a low, humming vibration, subtle but omnipresent, like a cord held beneath the ice. Hall ordered caution, but the pull of curiosity was almost magnetic. We couldn't ignore it. The recorder I carried captured the anomalies, overlaying our voices with low-frequency hums and interference that none of our instruments had predicted. Even Sykes' comms displayed erratic fluctuations, screens flickering with distorted shadows. Each shadow was fleeting, impossible to target or photograph clearly, yet we all saw them. The sensation of being observed intensified, and the ice shelf no longer felt like a neutral environment. It was deliberate, aware, and growing impatient with our intrusion. We gathered around the fractured northern wing, instruments humming, scanners pulsing, each of us alert to the slightest movement. Footsteps, echoes, whispers, or distant metallic scrapes all heightened our sense of vulnerability. The symbols, the broken panels, the unnatural ice formations, they were impossible to dismiss. Even our training, our experience, our cold weather survival expertise couldn't shield us from the creeping realization that the previous team had encountered something far beyond simple environmental hazards. By the end of the day, the anomaly was undeniable. The ice, the structures, the scattered equipment, they were communicating something beyond comprehension. And though no creature had yet revealed itself, every sensory cue screamed one warning. Outpost 09 was no longer just an abandoned facility. Something ancient, intelligent, and powerful had made itself known, and our presence was no longer ignored. The moment we realized the anomalies weren't coincidental, tension among the squad escalated. Hall insisted on procedure: document, report, contain. But his usual calm was fraying at the edges. "We don't touch anything else tonight," he ordered, his voice clipped. Yet even as he spoke, I could see him glancing toward the fractured northern wing with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Discipline was his mantra, but the ice shelf had a way of undermining even the most composed mind. Sykes was the first to break with caution. His eyes darted nervously at every flicker on his monitors. "We're being watched," he muttered under his breath. "I don't care what protocol says. We've got something out there, outside the sensor range, outside any measurable frequency. Something knows we're here." I tried to reassure him, citing environmental interference and instrument error, but he wasn't convinced. Every static burst, every low hum, every subtle shadow intensified his paranoia. Vega remained calm outwardly, but I could see the strain in her hands. She was meticulously checking environmental readings, recalibrating sensors, and logging data, but each anomaly weighed on her like a physical load. "The patterns aren't natural," she admitted quietly, voice steady but tight. "Temperature fluctuations, glyph formation, energy spikes, they're coordinated. Whatever's doing this isn't reacting randomly. It's observing, judging." Her medical training allowed her to compartmentalize fear, but even she couldn't deny the increasing tension among us. I found myself in a strange position, observer and participant. My recon experience told me to trust my senses, yet I had no tangible evidence of a living entity. The anomalies were too precise, too intelligent for coincidence, but too strange to attribute to any known force. I tried to maintain a tactical mindset, keeping the team cohesive, but the ice shelf had begun to erode more than our physical stability. It was eroding our confidence, our unity. Arguments broke out in subtle ways. Hall wanted to proceed with reconnaissance, Sykes urged immediate extraction, and Vega suggested containment and observation. Each perspective was valid, and yet each clashed against the others. Orders, protocol, and survival instinct became entangled with instinctive fear. We were no longer just operating in a hostile environment. We were operating under a psychological siege. The walls of the outpost felt closer, the shadows longer, and every sound amplified. By nightfall, the disagreement reached a tipping point. The northern wing's fractured panels glimmered in the dim artificial light, casting shadows that danced across the floor like predators. The ice tunnel outside remained silent, but seemed impossibly close. Every man was aware that the previous team had vanished here, and that awareness became a silent, shared accusation. None of us wanted to admit that we might follow the same fate. The psychological tension was as tangible as the frost biting through our suits. Even as we prepared for a night rotation, no consensus was reached. We were united in training but divided by doubt. Each step we took, each monitor checked, each breath drawn carried weight, not just from the cold or exertion, but from the creeping, unspoken acknowledgement that Outpost 09 had changed us. Fear was no longer a reaction. It was a constant companion, infiltrating every thought, every glance, and every decision. We found it just beyond the northern ridge, beneath a stretch of ice that, until then, had seemed unremarkable. A fissure opened like a jagged mouth, revealing a subterranean chamber carved deep into the glacier. The edges of the ice were impossibly smooth, polished as if by hands that didn't belong to humans. Frost-coated stalactites hung in geometrically precise patterns, reflecting the weak artificial light from our headlamps in prismatic shards. Even through goggles, the scene was alien. No natural formation could have created such symmetry. Descending into the chamber, the temperature rose slightly, an odd inversion in the midst of Antarctic cold. The air carried a faint metallic tang, like iron dissolved in water. Our boots crunched on ice that didn't sound like ice. It had a hollow, resonant quality. Hall motioned for us to stop and scan. Our thermal scopes revealed shapes beneath the frost, large forms that didn't move, yet suggested life. I took careful notes, sketching outlines in my field log, knowing that if this record survived, it would be the only evidence of what lay here. At the center of the chamber was the artifact, or entity. We weren't yet certain. It was enormous, frozen beneath a thick layer of translucent ice. But the form was unmistakably deliberate. Humanoid, yet not human. Limbs stretched at impossible angles, proportions suggesting something ancient, predating any known species. The head, partially obscured by frost, bore features that seemed to shift when viewed from different angles, a subtle illusion, but unmistakable. It radiated a low-level energy field. Our instruments couldn't categorize it. Even Sykes, usually skeptical, whispered, "This isn't natural." Around the frozen entity, remnants of machinery and instruments littered the floor, half buried in ice, corroded by time. Some were clearly human, others completely alien in design, etched with the same indecipherable symbols we'd seen on the outpost walls. The chamber seemed both functional and ceremonial, as though it had been used for observation, containment, or ritual. Every detail screamed age, intelligence, and purpose far beyond our comprehension. We moved cautiously closer. The ice was thick, almost impossibly so, but cracks ran along its surface. When I tapped a gloved hand against it, a deep vibration resonated through the chamber, like a heartbeat amplified through ice. The artifact, or being, wasn't just present. It was aware, responding subtly to our intrusion. Vega noted spikes in electromagnetic readings, untraceable heat signatures, and localized pressure variations. Every instrument told the same story. This was alive in some sense, though dormant, patient, and ancient. The scale of the discovery was overwhelming. Outpost 09 had been a veneer over something far older, far more powerful than anyone could have anticipated. Our mission of reconnaissance and retrieval had evolved into witnessing a secret buried beneath layers of ice, untouched by time. The Outpost's previous team had clearly encountered this, and their disappearance now made sense in the most horrifying way. The anomaly was alive, ancient, and fully capable of defending its domain. Even as we stood there, documenting, scanning, and whispering updates through comms, a sense of foreboding filled the chamber. The ice seemed to pulse faintly, and the shadows cast by our headlamps flickered in patterns that didn't match our movements. We were intruders in a place not meant to be disturbed, and beneath it all, the subtle awareness that whatever we had found wasn't merely an artifact. It was the prelude to a threat that the continent had held secret for millennia. It happened in an instant, the kind of moment that bends time and memory. I had stepped closer to the frozen entity, scanning it through the ice with my thermal imager. The frost was so thick I had to press my gloved hand against its surface to test stability. The ice responded, almost like skin over muscle, a subtle vibration traveling through the chamber. I froze mid-movement, realizing too late that the contact had been enough. A deep, resonant hum filled the chamber, vibrating through the ice floor and walls. The artifact or creature stirred, not fully awake, but alive in a way we hadn't anticipated. Thermal readings spiked erratically. The air became electrically charged, our hair standing on end under the helmets. Monitors went haywire, readings fluctuating wildly, images distorting, static flooding the comms. Sykes swore, clutching his analyzer, eyes wide. "It's reacting. We triggered it somehow." Hall barked orders, trying to regain control, but even he sounded uncertain, his voice quivering in the cold hum of the chamber. Then the ice cracked. Not a single fracture, but a web of fractures spreading across the chamber floor and walls. Tiny shards rained down like crystalline hail, reflecting our headlamps in jagged, disorienting patterns. The subtle hum became a deep, vibrating pulse, almost musical, resonating through our bones. Vega shouted to move back, but the floor shifted beneath us, forcing careful steps. The temperature spike now burned hot and cold simultaneously, our suits working overtime, our breath steaming violently inside the visors. Something unseen moved outside the chamber. Shadows flickered across the walls in impossible angles, silhouettes that didn't match any team member. Hall signaled us to tighten formation, but the ice beneath the catwalks groaned under a growing pressure. A faint metallic clang echoed, then another, and the sound multiplied, coming from multiple directions at once. The chamber, once silent and awe-inspiring, became alive with warning. Whatever lay beneath Outpost 09 was aware, reactive, and no longer passive. Panic flirted with discipline. Each of us responded differently. Hall tried to maintain order, issuing concise commands. Sykes shouted technical observations, his fear palpable. Vega focused on environmental readings, frantically calculating localized pressure and temperature changes. And I tried to keep calm, recording, scanning, and noting everything, knowing that any detail might save us. The ice seemed to pulse in rhythm with some unseen heartbeat, and our senses screamed that the anomaly was no longer dormant. It was preparing to assert control over its domain. By the time we realized the magnitude of the trigger, containment was no longer an option. The artifact's stirring had awakened a chain reaction. Instruments failing, structures groaning, temperature spikes, and distant scraping noises that weren't human. Even standing in the chamber, we felt small, exposed, and utterly unprepared. The ice beneath us was no longer passive. It was a medium, a conduit, a warning that the ancient entity, or something else entirely, was aware of our intrusion and ready to defend itself. The moment the ice trembled beneath our boots, the chamber erupted into chaos. Shards of frozen crystal exploded from the walls and floor, catching in headlamps and spraying the air with glittering, jagged fragments. A low, resonant roar, impossible to place, somewhere between ice cracking and an animal growl, echoed from the depths, vibrating through our chest plates. We fired warning shots, suppressed bursts ricocheting off the ice, but the sound seemed swallowed, lost in the unnatural acoustics of the cavern. The first attack came without warning. A shadow darted across the walls, moving faster than our eyes could track. Sykes yelled as his analyzer flew from his hands, bouncing and shattering against the floor. Something struck the catwalk above, sending a shower of ice down on Vega. She rolled, narrowly avoiding the shards, her cry blending with the metallic screech of bending panels. Hall shouted orders, but his voice seemed to lag behind the chaos, drowned in the storm of sound, vibration, and movement. Thermal imaging went haywire. Flickering shapes appeared and vanished. Limbs, claws, something humanoid yet grotesquely elongated. We tried to regroup, but the chamber was collapsing around us. Ice floors buckled, stairways shifted, and the tunnels we had entered only moments before became labyrinthine traps. Each step was uncertain. Every shadow could hide movement. I could see Vega's hands trembling as she tried to bandage minor lacerations while dodging falling debris. Fear was no longer just a psychological response. It was a survival mechanism screaming in every nerve. Hall ordered retreat toward the northern ice shaft, the only apparent exit. But it was like running through a distorted mirror. The ice beneath our feet groaned and shifted, sending cracks snaking toward us as if something beneath the glacier was actively undermining our path. The roar returned, louder, punctuated by scraping and crunching from unseen angles. The entity, or entities, weren't just attacking physically. They were manipulating the environment, turning the ice shelf and chamber into a weapon. One by one, team members were forced into defensive actions. Sykes dropped his comm device to shield himself from a flying shard, disappearing behind a jagged ice column. Vega pulled me back just in time as the floor beneath Hall collapsed slightly, sending him sprawling. I barely maintained my footing, reaching for the emergency beacon while dodging falling crystal and shards of ice. Every second was measured in micro-survival. Crouch, roll, dodge, fire, advance, retreat. There was no time for hesitation. In the midst of the chaos, a new awareness took hold. The anomaly was not merely reactive, it was hunting, assessing, and separating us. The corridors and tunnels of the outpost became a disorienting maze, and even when we ran, the shadows anticipated our movement. Each twist revealed new fractures, shards, and distortions. Our senses were overloaded. Sound, sight, touch, all manipulated by an intelligence embedded in ice and shadow. The outpost, the ice shelf, the frozen chamber, it was all a single living trap. By the time we reached the edge of the northern shaft, our formation was broken, the team fragmented. Hall called out, but the echoes returned, distorted, delayed. Vega and I clung together, breath ragged, visibility near zero, shards glittering around us like lethal confetti. The mission had transformed from reconnaissance and retrieval into pure survival. Outpost 09 had become a hunting ground, and the creature, or force, had rewritten the rules. We were intruders in a domain older and more powerful than any of us had imagined. I stumbled out of the collapsing chamber into the open ice shelf, heart pounding so violently I thought it might burst through my chest plate. The wind hit like a wall, cutting across my face, whipping snow into my visor and obscuring everything beyond a few meters. The northern shaft behind me groaned and fractured further, and through the storm, I could see shadows moving unnaturally across the ice, shapes that shouldn't exist, testing my perception with every blink. Vega had been with me for a moment, but one misstep on a hidden crevasse sent her sliding downward. I grabbed for her arm, but the ice gave way beneath both of us. She vanished in a cloud of snow, her scream swallowed by the wind. I pulled myself free, crawling on hands and knees toward a ridge that promised higher ground and a temporary refuge. Every breath burned in my lungs. The cold was relentless, but fear and adrenaline forced me onward. The emergency beacon was in my pack, my only lifeline. I activated it, and a weak pulse of light cut through the blizzard, bouncing off ice ridges. I prayed it would reach command, that someone somewhere could triangulate my position. The wind distorted the signal, and I had no way of knowing if it was transmitting. Every second spent checking was a second the shadows could close in. My gloved hands trembled as I tried to stabilize the device, the light flickering like a heartbeat. I moved cautiously, scanning the horizon. The ice shelf seemed endless, but survival demanded direction. Crevasses yawned like open mouths, each step a gamble. My thermal imaging showed nothing moving beyond the immediate area, but I knew better. The ice had already demonstrated intelligence, awareness. I had no doubt the anomaly, or multiple anomalies, were tracking, observing, judging my every move. Even in my isolation, I wasn't alone. I found a shallow depression behind a ridge, small enough to provide partial cover. I collapsed, trying to quiet my breathing, listening for any sign of pursuit. The storm raged, but there was a new sound beneath it. Faint, irregular cracking, like ice expanding unnaturally. I realized I could do nothing but wait. Movement was death. Noise was death. I checked my instruments. Sensors flickered and sputtered, thermal feeds showing nothing consistent, but static and low-frequency vibrations persisted. The continent itself seemed alive, aware of my presence, and indifferent to human will. Time became meaningless. The sky and ice merged into a blinding white canvas. Every sense was strained: sound, sight, touch, even the subtle pressure shifts beneath my boots. I huddled behind the ridge, watching the emergency beacon pulse weakly, knowing it was my only chance at being found. My mind reeled with the events: shattered outpost, fracturing ice, fleeing teammates, the frozen entity, the glyphs, the low-frequency hum. Outpost 09 had claimed everything but me, and even that might be temporary. Even in that isolated depression, adrenaline mixed with despair, I was alone, surviving by a thread, acutely aware that the ice shelf had become both predator and labyrinth. The storm masked movement, but I could feel the presence watching, patient and relentless. I would have to navigate this frozen nightmare to survive, carrying with me only fragments of knowledge, fleeting impressions, and the overwhelming certainty that whatever had awakened beneath Outpost 09 was far older, far smarter, and far more dangerous than any of us could comprehend. I woke hours later in a standard-issue medical ward, the fluorescent lights harsh after the endless white of the ice shelf. My suit was shredded, frost and blood crusted in patches along sleeves and knees. Vega and the others, I couldn't remember. The official line was clear. No other personnel were recovered. No bodies were found. Hall had radioed in a partial team collapse, but every official report I signed glossed over the anomalous, the inexplicable, and the terrifying. Outpost 09 was simply compromised by environmental factors, nothing more. The debrief was clinical, detached, almost antiseptic. Officers in starched uniforms and press suits questioned me in cycles, tape recorders capturing every word. I spoke cautiously, mindful of classified protocols, yet every recounting felt like an exercise in futility. The ice, the frozen entity, the glyphs, the anomalies, none of it officially existed. I was trained to follow orders, to adhere to procedure, but trauma is not so easily confined to paperwork. I left the room with a sense of disorientation, each corridor of the base a mirror of the white void I had barely survived. Physical therapy and medical evaluation became a ritual. Frostbite had damaged my extremities, cuts were slow to heal, and the stress-induced tremors persisted. Psychologists questioned me, their language technical, probing for PTSD markers. I recounted nightmares, hallways bending impossibly, shadows moving against logic, the frozen entity stirring under the ice. They nodded, took notes, but never acknowledged the reality of what I saw. Stress response, they said. Isolation trauma. Their words felt hollow. I knew what I had seen, what I had felt, but the official narrative demanded silence. Back in the debriefing room, sealed files awaited me. Every report, every recording from Outpost 09, every instrument reading I had painstakingly logged, was classified at the highest level. Any public acknowledgement was forbidden. The anomaly had been effectively erased from official records. The mission report concluded with technical language about environmental failure, communication disruption, and personnel loss. No mention of shadows, no mention of glyphs, no mention of the frozen entity. The continent's secret remained buried under layers of ice, paper, and protocol. Even days later, the weight of survival lingered. I found myself scanning shadows, noticing subtle movements in empty hallways, hearing whispers of low-frequency vibrations in silence. Nightmares replayed the chamber, the ice pulses, the roar, the relentless storm. I was home physically, but the mental landscape remained Antarctic, white, infinite, hostile, and unrelenting. Every attempt at normalcy clashed with the memory of something ancient and deliberate, something that had marked me by proximity, if not by direct harm. The worst part was the official denial. Superiors smiled, thanked me for my service, and assured me of procedural compliance, all while erasing the reality of Outpost 09 from the world. There were no medals, no commendations, no acknowledgement of survival against an intelligent, ancient threat. I carried the weight alone. Files, recordings, and personal logs would exist only in my memory, and every word I recorded felt like a testament against a silence designed to protect the world from knowledge it couldn't comprehend, or perhaps to protect itself from accountability. Weeks had passed since the official debrief, yet Outpost 09 lingered in every corner of my mind. I was back home, the monotony of normal life clashing violently with what I'd endured. Even the hum of household appliances set my teeth on edge, reminding me of the low-frequency vibrations beneath the ice. I thought I was safe, that the continent had reclaimed its secret and left me behind, but safety, it seemed, was an illusion. It started with the signal. A single, brief spike on my personal scanner. Anomalous frequency, low amplitude, almost imperceptible. I froze, the blood draining from my face. The emergency beacon I had activated on the ice shelf weeks ago should have long since died. Yet something responded. Not human, not official. Something was reaching back. My pulse quickened as I scanned the static, triangulating a vague origin. It was distant, yet unmistakably deliberate. My training screamed caution, yet curiosity pulled me forward. Equipment I hadn't touched in weeks, thermal sensors, field recorders, began displaying erratic behavior. The air in my apartment felt charged, static clinging to every surface. Shadows in corners seemed heavier, darker, bending the light. I told myself it was stress, the residual effect of trauma. But the signal persisted, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat across frequencies only I could detect. Then came the knock at the door. Slow, deliberate. I froze, gloved hands gripping the counter. Nobody should know. Nobody should be watching. Yet the knock was followed by silence, a pause pregnant with intention. When I looked through the peephole, the hallway was empty, yet a faint shimmer in the air, like heat waves or an unseen distortion, rippled outward. My stomach churned. Whatever had stirred beneath Outpost 09 wasn't finished. It was patient, intelligent, and aware of me. I retreated from the door, scanning equipment, double-checking communications. Every device registered fluctuations, some subtle, others impossible. The low hum returned, audible now if I strained my ears, synchronized with the pulsing signal. A sense of observation suffused the apartment, intimate and invasive. My training had taught me to adapt, survive, and escape, but no drill or protocol prepared me for this. The entity, or its proxy, was not confined to the ice shelf. Finally, I activated my recorder, speaking into it with the calm I could muster. The signal pulsed in response, almost conversational, and for the first time I felt its attention directly. The low-frequency vibration thrummed against my chest, my instruments, and even the floor beneath me. And as I spoke my final note into the recorder, the apartment lights flickered, the signal spiked, and the air around me shivered. Something ancient had reached beyond the ice, and I realized with horror that Outpost 09 was not a location. It was a presence. The pulse subsided, leaving silence that was heavier than any storm. I sat in the dim light, heart hammering, staring at my instruments, knowing the story was far from over. Whatever we had awakened beneath the Antarctic ice was patient, deliberate, and infinitely aware. And now, it had found a way to reach me.